Historical battles are intriguing. From cowboy shootouts in the American Wild West, the medieval recreations of European battles, and even the samurai films of Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa. Their rich history is very interesting, giving a sense of national pride to the viewers and to the people. But have you ever thought about this? What battles have happened here in the Philippines? What importance do these battles have? And what is the history behind the weapons that we have used? Find out more as we explore the rich history of Filipino battles, tactics, and weapons. Let us start from the very beginning. Back before the Spanish colonization and Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe, our ancestors settled on this land, being part of tribes and barangays. According to Miguel de Luarca in his book Relación de las Islas Filipinas, battles during this area would usually be between raiding and defending tribes. Justified reasons for conducting wars would be of three cases: when a member of a tribe is killed by another tribe without justified cause, when the wives of a tribe are stolen by another tribe, and when the member of a tribe who visits another tribe under the premise of peaceful trading and bartering is wrongfully treated by the other tribe. Other reasons may be for raiding and plundering enemy villages, or in some cases, defending against Moro pirates. This brings us to our first story, the story of Sli Lumay. This story comes from the Agenid, a book about the rich culture of the Philippines, specifically in Cebu. It details of Sri Rajamura Lumaya, or his shortened name Sri Lumay, who was the first Raja of modern-day Cebu. He required all his people to learn how to read and write, and more importantly, man boats to defend against pirates. These pirates were called the Magalos, or destroyers of peace. They came from Mindanao and would raid towns in Cebu. To combat them, Sri Lumay employed scorched earth tactics to towns. Scorched earth tactics refers to destroying everything that might help out an enemy during a battle. In Sri Lumay's case, he would quite literally burn down entire villages and towns that the Magalos would target. Such towns were later called Kang Sli Lumayang Sugbu, or Sli Lumay's scorched earth or Great Fire. Sugbu here in this case would be the same word that we use for Cebu today. Expeditions made by Ferdinand Magellan were the first encounters of the Filipinos to the Spanish people. According to accounts made by Antonio Pigafetta, they had touched down on the Philippine Islands in 1521 at the beach of Homonhon. They had met and greeted Raja Humabon at the island, bringing offerings of bells, combs, mirrors, among other things, forming a friendly relationship with the Raja. Raja Humabon's rival, Datu Lapu-Lapu, however, did not accept the rule of Spain. Ferdinand Magellan, upon hearing this, threatened the Datu to obey the rule of Spain or to face their wrath. Lapu-Lapu responded accordingly with another threat. Thus, the Battle of Mactan commenced. This battle was an utter defeat for the Spanish due to the sheer number difference between the 49 Spanish soldiers of Magellan and the 1,500 soldiers of Lapu-Lapu. The ferocity and wisdom of the Filipinos is also highlighted through the strategies and weapons employed during these fights.
First, the strategies. Despite the obviously technologically ahead Spaniards, the Filipinos had the advantage of not only numbers but in fighting under the local terrain. Accounts of Pigafetta's writing stated their difficulty fighting in knee-deep water, where the heavier armor of the Spanish would prove to be a detriment to their positioning. This usage of the environment to conquer their opponents would prove to be a huge factor to the defeat of the expedition. Lapu-Lapu also effectively positioned his men during this battle, splitting his army into three groups. One to face Magellan's men head-on, other two would flank the enemy, surrounding Magellan.
Second, the weapons. While Magellan's crew had more advanced weaponry, it may also have been to their detriment. Muskets took too long to reload, taking 1 minute per shot. as opposed to the bows, arrows, and spears that Lapu-Lapu used, where skilled archers could shoot one arrow per second or 2 seconds, and warriors could reuse spears that were already thrown from the ground. Common materials for the spears would include rattan, or a flexible type of wood available in the Philippines, which would be fire hardened and sometimes even tipped with iron. These ranged weapons would be targeted at the gaps of Magellan's armor and his soldiers, particularly at the feet and the legs of their soldiers. Not only that, the arrows were also covered in poison, which sources have said to be extracted from the aconitum plant, or otherwise known as wolf's bane, which would cause neurological and cardiac effects, slowing down the movement of the enemies. There was also the weapon that had killed Ferdinand Magellan, the Campilan. It is a single-edged sword which can be used by either one or two hands, and is usually equipped by datus, the nobility and renowned warriors. It is a symbol of power and bravery, and at the pommel, or the end of the blade, creatures like crocodiles, monitor lizards, or even the mythical creature, the Bakunawa, is depicted as a sign of strength. The fork-like end of the blade is designed to pick up heads of beheaded enemies. Even with Lapu-Lapu's resistance to Spanish rule, however, the Spaniards were still able to create a Spanish settlement by virtue of Legazpi's expedition to the Philippines and creation of the first Spanish settlement here in the country in 1572.
Though a large military force was not available to stand against the Spaniards during the occupation, many forms of resistance eventually rose up to stand against them. The Cavite Mutiny, an uprising of Filipino military personnel in the Spanish fort of San Felipe in Cavite, was one of these occasions. Despite them being able to initially take control of the fort, the mutineers were eventually forced to surrender and later be executed for their rebellion. This particular mutiny, however, is believed to have inspired a chain of events that would eventually lead to the Philippine Revolution of 1896. Also known as the Katipunan, the KKK was initially a secret organization that was only brought to light in 1896, which sparked the beginning of the Philippine Revolution. Formed by Deodato Arellano, Andres Bonifacio, Valentin Diaz, Ladislao Diwa, Jose Dizon, and Teodoro Plata, its objective was to simply allow the Philippines to gain independence from its Spanish occupiers. A strategy that was proven effective during the combat against the Spaniards were surround tactics that involved hitting an enemy from a tight position on both the rear and front. During the Battle of Imus, Baldomero Aguinaldo, first cousin of Emilio Aguinaldo, organized a series of river crossings with the objective of cutting off a wave of Spanish reinforcements. This proved to be effective, with the battle ending with the entire engaging Spanish force nearly destroyed. This strategy would once again show its face in the Battle of Zapote Bridge, this time by a force led by Emilio Aguinaldo. Planting a series of traps and explosives on the bridge, the Philippine forces sprung an ambush on a force of 16,000 Spaniards who were crossing the bridge, with rebels emerging from the drenched shrubbery to conduct hand-to-hand combat. This was similarly effective, forcing the Spaniards to retreat to Muntinlupa. During the Battle of Binakayan Darahican, overwhelming tactics were utilized to great effect against the Spaniards, which proved useful to compensate for the rebels' lack of uniformity when it came to weaponry. The Spaniards, with limited numbers, spread thinly between specific territories, were quickly overwhelmed by waves of Katipuneros who rushed to their lines.
Most weapons used during the Spanish occupation of battles were either improvised weapons, farming tools, or seized from the Spaniards. Some bladed weapons include the bolo and attack machetes that were used for farming, clearing vegetations, and chopping meat. The golok sword, which was used for chopping wood, and looted sabers from Spanish forces, such as the one looted from General Aguirre during his encounter with Emilio Aguinaldo at the Battle of Imus, in which he was running away, accidentally leaving behind his sword. As for firearms, rifles like the Remington and Mauser 1893 rifles, and handguns like the Mauser C96 were looted from Spanish tiradores, or otherwise known as marksmen, and Spanish officers, which enabled long-range engagements for the KKK. As we transition from the Spanish occupation to the American-Philippine War, In terms of weapons, not much has actually changed. We're still using leftovers from the Spanish wars as is. However, what did change were the tactics that we employed against the Americans.
Sadly, the armed resistance of Filipinos against the Americans are not regarded as of any renown due to the one-sided nature of the war in conventional means. Despite this, the tactics employed by the Philippine Army had advanced beyond mass charges or simple ambushes, as he had started using methods that favored denial of key strategic positions and the like. In the Battle of Calumpit, General Luna slowed down the American advance by destroying bridges as his forces retreated, allowing a good amount of his soldiers to pull back safely. These tactics would be utilized in another engagement in the Pampanga River, where a major bridge was blown upon a deep river crossing to slow down the American advance. Despite all these tactics, there was still much for the Filipino to learn if they wished to see success in the modernizing battlefield.
From the American occupation, we now move on to the Japanese occupation of the Philippines during World War II. What is interesting about World War II was that we had adopted many of the strategies that the Americans had employed in their military. However, the weapons that we gained were only that of hand-me-downs of previous weapons used by the Americans. Because of Americans, we got weapons like the M1903 Springfield and M1917 Enfield, enabling the firing of multiple shots before needing to reload. Additionally, we also still used some of the weapons that were left over from the Spanish occupation.
As Japan declared war upon the United States in the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor, it launched simultaneous attacks on many Southeast Asian territories held by the Western powers. One of these targets was the Philippines, which was besieged heavily by the Japanese in the brutal campaign. This eventually ended with the defeat of the conventional forces of the United States, which ensured the Japanese had occupied the Philippines. Despite this, an extensive guerrilla movement rose to fight against the occupiers, which became a major hindrance to the Japanese forces. These groups were plentiful yet fractured, with resistance groups such as the American-sponsored guerrillas under the United States Army Forces of the Far East, or the USAFFE, the Hukbayang Bayan Laban sa mga Mahapon, or Hukbalahap, and the Moros. Despite these splintered groups, they proved instrumental by providing information and raiding key supply areas in select regions. Groups like the Huk also established 100-man squadrons which could better operate independently, allowing for flexibility when it came to conducting operations. Although aspects such as the traditional ambush, denial of key positions, and the like were still very much in use, one key adaptation of the Filipino resistance had in comparison to its past tactics is the ability to coordinate with one another and provide information at a faster pace. As the post-war era dawned, Filipinos grew more accustomed to modern warfare and had solidified themselves as solid combatants. In the Battle of Yultong in the Korean War, a small force of 1,000 soldiers was able to drive away a force numbering 40,000, mainly due to the tactics of elastic defense, wherein a force intentionally retreats to maintain a cohesive front line, only to counterattack when the enemy is in a vulnerable position due to a rushed offensive. Just think of it as letting someone run all the way to your house, only to punch them in the face when they're trying to catch their breath.
So, where are the Filipino weapons of today? Let us talk about the blades, as they have evolved to be easily manufactured and to be versatile in many uses. An example of which is the Ginunting swords, which are the official swords of the Philippine Marine Forces. The Ginunting swords resemble two halves of a scissor and is designed to be used as a pair. The longer sword is designed mainly for offense, while the shorter sword is designed for parrying and blocking attacks. The inward curve of the blade also lends handily to cutting away at leaves, woods, and bamboo for jungle exploration. Filipino weapons have also become popularized due to pop culture. The perfect example of this is the balisong, or the butterfly knife, with origins coming back to the Balisong Barangay, which is located at Tagal, Batangas. Now, it has become an online sensation, with first-person shooter games adding this knife to their arsenal of weapons.
And all in all, the rich history of the Philippines can be found deep-rooted in the battles that we had to face. From Moro pirates to the colonizers, utilizing whatever is directly available as a weapon, the hearts of the Filipinos were always ignited with a passion and desire to protect what is most important to them, their identity and their freedom.